I just had a really enlightening interview with Monica Gullotta, who endured tremendously toxic, debilitating shame in her life and has become a counselor helping people to overcome shame. She talks about how shame can be like an emotional cancer that is sabotaging your life, the causes of shame, and how shame can induce grief. And she talks about healing strategies for conquering shame. She's got a wonderful book about why it is so important to heal our shame. And there is so much more to this absolutely wonderful interview. Don't miss it. You're going to learn a lot. So come join us. Heartfelt, many blessings.
Hi there, and welcome to the Grief and Rebirth podcast. I'm your host, author and trauma survivor Irene Weinberg, here to encourage you wherever you are in your healing journey. In each episode, I chat with incredible grief and trauma specialists, healers, mediums, and celebs, as well as remarkable people who have inspiring healing stories to share. If you're looking for a podcast that's both uplifting and inspiring, you've found it. Let us help you find your joy in life.
Hi, everyone. I hope this finds each of you so very well. I'm speaking to you from my studio in West Orange, New Jersey, and I could not be more delighted to have the pleasure of interviewing Monica Gullotta, who is a mental health educator, a mentor, a lecturer, and the author of 3 eye-opening books that address mental health. Monica's latest book, titled Conquering Shame, Surviving to Thriving, is filled with insights into the damaging effects of shame, surviving shame, and healing from shame. Monica has a master's degree specializing in counseling. In 1999, she founded and facilitated the Upstate Group for Panic, Anxiety, and Depression. And in 2008, she received the Volunteer of the Year Award presented by the Mental Health Association of Onondaga County, New York, for her innovative work that gives people suffering from panic, anxiety, and depression the support and knowledge needed to help themselves. In 2009, Monica founded the Ray of Hope Wellness Center, where she provides one-on-one mentoring to educate individuals contending with anxiety and depression and other mental health maladies. She recently developed the developmental and recovery stages of shame to help individuals understand how shame becomes solidified and provide a path for conquering it. And she has also created a number of educational workshops. Monica has appeared on radio and television, and she has lectured and spoken on a wide range of topics pertinent to mental health at numerous venues. I'm looking forward to talking with Monica, who lives in Baldwinsville, New York, about her personal journey with toxic shame, the causes and effects of shame, how shame induces grief, the importance of healing shame, and so much more, for what will surely be a very enlightening interview with a special woman who has many healing insights about shame to share with us. Hey, Monica, a heartfelt welcome to Grief and Rebirth podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on your podcast, and thank you so much for that extraordinary introduction. I am just so happy and pleased to be here with you today. It means the world to me, Irene, and thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, when I was preparing your interview, I have to be very honest with our listeners, and they know I had a very painful childhood of my own, and I have dealt with a lot of shame. I've been in therapy for it and all, but working on your interview was another healing moment for me because I got to be even more in touch with what had happened that I've been working on dropping the backpack of suffering all my life. But it was like, oh, right, she's identifying this that I've dealt with and all of that. I mean, for our listeners, I personally was abandoned by my family for 23 years, which is a tremendous cause of shame.
Yeah.
And I, I had a very dysfunctional childhood. So let's begin before we get into your story.
Mhm.
Can you educate us all? What exactly is shame and how is it a learned behavior?
Okay. So first and foremost, shame is an emotion. And because it's so insidious, it can be misconstrued for something else. But it is absolutely an emotion. It is not a mental illness. And typically, how shame takes shape and hold is through the environment. So, the environment that I was living in, unfortunately, was highly, highly dysfunctional and toxic. And I had two parents that were both, quite frankly, mentally ill, and they were ill equipped to deal with their own shame and their own issues because they, in essence, were unhealed themselves. So, what they did, in fact, was they couldn't tolerate their own shame. So, they, in essence, projected it upon their children. And so, in essence, that's exactly what happened to me, and primarily with my mother, because of her own lack of ego strength and her narcissism. She's like, I can't deal with this, so let's pawn it off on our children and pawn it off on Monica. So, in essence, that's how my shame began to cultivate itself.
I totally get that. I had a similar story, and it sounds to me like when I know that you talk about the causes of shame being poverty, mental illness, secrets, right? Bullying, abuse, sex, sexuality, religion, abandonment, they all bring about shame. I'm wondering, Monica, is it true, like, if they're mentally ill or whatever is going on, it's very easy to blame the child for whatever their things are. So now all of a sudden you're carrying responsibility for things that are not that did not even originate from you, right?
Absolutely. But not only that, because you have to think in terms of a child and their lack of maturity. And what they don't want to do is they don't want to lose their parents. So, in essence, as a defense mechanism, they're going to take on that shame because guess what? I don't want to lose mom and dad. So, it's again, shame is extremely insidious, how it takes shape, how it takes hold, how it can start cultivating. And usually, all the family members involved in a dysfunctional family unit, they're not even cognizant of the shame that themselves, and in essence, what they are doing with their children unknowingly on an unconscious level.
Right, right. I can totally get that. And you also talk about, which was so, because I identified it when I was reading your book and getting ready for the interview. I felt like this too. You say that inwardly you feel like an imposter when you're a child who has had shame basically foisted upon them. So can you talk to that also?
Absolutely, absolutely. So obviously, I'm going about my life. Like you said, I have a master's degree. I'm doing interviews, I'm doing radio, television, getting awards for my work. But so interestingly enough, whenever the shame would surface, it would be in that professional arena. So I am facilitating my support groups, and I will never forget. I literally, Irene, I was very versed, and I could literally, do these lesson plans. I knew them like the back of my hand. It was like, okay, recite whatever. But as I'm up there and I'm standing in front of the group, all of a sudden, the self-deprecating thoughts are coming. You're a phony. You're an imposter. Who do you think you are? You don't know what the hell you're talking about. Why don't you sit down? That is what imposter syndrome feels like. But then to add insult to injury, I'm experiencing what is referred to as cognitive dissonance. So there's this disconnect. I'm this professional. I'm doing all of these things, but I am feeling like I am this wretched, pathetic, phony that doesn't know what the heck she's talking about. And that is what imposter syndrome feels like. It's horrific.
It's awful. So here you can have this really successful event and still go back to your hotel room or whatever and feel lousy about yourself because you can't even give yourself credit for what you're doing. And you had this. Now you're talking about you're even a professional and you're making these presentations and getting these feelings. So what was your personal journey healing this toxic shame that was hidden within you for decades? What was that like? I mean, because you had to first come to terms with your shame.
Okay, so it started back in 2020 during the throes of COVID. Okay, and of course, I'm doing an interview and I used the wrong word. And at that moment, the shame beast that I was carrying around for decades and decades became triggered. At which point, I know at this point, I'm spiraling downward and I need help. So I decide, you know what? I'm going to get back into therapy and I'm going to start working with somebody. And lo and behold, during a session, we're talking. And Irene, I kid you not, I'm feeling so wretched and unworthy that I cannot even look at him in the face. And he says to me, excuse me, you have toxic shame. And at that point, I was not even, I kid you not, I was not even aware of shame, what it was, and that I had it. And given the fact that it was such an insidious emotion, and it can hijack a human being in any waking moment, I decided to write a book about it. And again, I want to put a spotlight on shame here and now, so your viewers and listeners can understand just how debilitating it is to navigate through those steps and to conquer it the way I have. So that's when, in essence, it kind of really reared its ugly head for me.
Wow. And that's how you decided to pursue shame as your calling, actually, through healing it, right?
Yeah. Well, then what happens is, as a result of the book, all of a sudden it starts catching on like wildfire. And I start doing lectures and presentations, and people are like coming out of the woodwork. And so this conversation of shame needs to be out there. It needs to be normalized. It needs to be discussed, because the sad reality is, like myself and how many other professionals are out there, or paraprofessionals, they're living with shame and they're not even cognizant of it. And it's killing them like it was killing me.
That's right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I can so identify with my personal story also. And you went through the mental health system with your shame?
So what happened was, this is so interesting. So as I was working with a therapist for a number of years, she had no idea what was going on with me. So it was funny, because I could be in a session and I would literally be, cowering and in a very shame position. And she was not even cognizant of it. So it wasn't until 2020, when I was working with, my therapist, that it came out, it surfaced. Nobody had a clue. That's how good I was, perhaps it maybe even unknowingly trying to hide it myself.
Well, we have a mask. Yes. And I can remember someone saying to me once, Irene, you can be very aloof. And when I'm not like that at all anymore, but that was the way I protected myself. And that was how I kept the mask in place.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Right. And you've got a great shame rock story that I love, because I liken it to when I tell people to drop their backpack, to heal and drop their backpack. I think your shame rock story is very similar to that. Could you share that with everyone?
Oh, Irene, this is so hilarious. This is so true. So I was literally at the point in my life where the shame and the magnitude of the shame that I was living was so debilitating that I wanted to feel it. I wanted to feel it physically, and I wanted to experience it metaphorically. So one day I have this aha moment. I kid you not. I go to my garden. I start digging. I'm not kidding. I get my shovel and I'm digging and I'm digging, and I'm looking for the biggest rock that I could find. And lo and behold, I found that rock. I bring it inside my house. I wash it, I shine it, I paint it. And on the top of that rock, I paint shame. Now it gets even better. I decide for the next 2 weeks, I am going to take that shame rock with me everywhere I go.
You just slip it in your purse?
Well, wait till you hear this. I take it to the grocery store. I take it to the bank. I take it to the library. I take it to the post office. But here's the thing. Because the shame rock is so big, it's not fitting in every purse that I'm using each day because I'm switching my purses off. So one day I go to the grocery store and my shame rock will not fit in my purse. I kid you not. So I said, screw it. I'm just going to put it in my grocery cart. So I'm putting all of my groceries in. And then, of course, it gets time, to go to the register, and I put all my items on the counter. So what do? I put my shame rock on the counter, and it goes to the cashier, at which point, this is so hilarious, she looks at the shame rock and she's like, what is this? And at that point, I'm thinking, oh God, she's thinking, we've got a live one on aisle 3. But to make a long story short, that was the most profound, helpful exercise for me because it really allowed me to understand how heavy the shame was that I was carrying. But here's the better part. After that, I started giving my shame rock to other clients so they could use it and do the same exercise, and it helped them really not only mitigate the effects of shame, but to really understand it and work through it and process it. So yeah, that's my
It's
shame
beautiful.
rock
That's
story.
amazing.
Yeah.
I really want to ask you about the 7 stages of shame, and you've
Uh-huh.
also got these 4 core elements of shame. But
Mhm.
I want to make a comment to everyone listening. I think and let's see if Monica agrees with me. I would say one of the hardest parts about healing your shame is to accept that your parents had so much pain and your parents weren't perfect and that they had their own history. And to now, when you're trying to heal it, you're consciously separating out from their story, which is, I think, a big part of it. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And I want to say this to you. This is so profound. After I finished writing my book, I realized that the shame that was projected upon me was never mine. In essence, it was their unhealed shame from generations upon generations. Shame is a generational thing.
It's
And if it's
ancestral.
exactly, and if it's never resolved, it continues to be cultivated and metastasize. So enter Monica. And I believe it definitely was this ongoing issue or cancer within the family, generationally speaking.
I
And I wanted
totally.
to put an end to it. And so here I am.
Well, if people heal, which
Yeah,
is what we're talking about, say someone goes to you to heal, they're identifying that they've inherited the shame. A lot of times someone has to change the legacy of the family. So
exactly.
when you heal, you get to actually change that, and now you're not passing that on to yours,
Exactly.
right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So Monica, educate us, please. What are the 7 stages of shame that you have developed?
So, if I can share the story with you very quickly, how the 7 stages kind of came up. So, I kid you not, Irene, one morning I was working out on my Stairmaster, level 16, and I believe the endorphins were really kicking. And lo and behold, the stages just literally came boom, 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 boom. And I literally had to get off my Stairmaster and I had to write them down. There wasn't clearly the meat that went with them, just the exact, stages. So with that, stage 1, okay, is victimization. And at this particular stage, the child or the individual is completely oblivious to the fact that they are being victimized. So it comes in way of maltreatment. It would include verbal abuse, emotional abuse, spiritual abuse, and sexual abuse. And again, the child or the individual is completely unaware, they're unconscious. So when it happened with me, my mother would say things to me like, well, you don't know how to dance, or you're going to end up in a mental institution like your father. So it is a very insidious thing. And again, as a child, you're totally oblivious to what's taking place. So that is stage number one. Stage number two is saturation. So at this particular stage, with the ongoing shame-based victimization, it now becomes chronic. There's a chronicity to it. And so what happens at this stage is that the child or individual starts to believe these falsehoods about themselves. So for instance, I am unworthy, I am defective, I am unlovable. And it is at this particular stage where the shame identity starts to become more solidified and it infiltrates the individual's mind. Stage three is indoctrination. So after ongoing shame-based victimization and shame-based saturation, the individual is now indoctrinated. So now guess what? They believe it. Yes, I am defective. I am unworthy. I
Absolutely.
am unlovable. And at this point, what they do is they disown the authentic self. And this is where the imposter or the false self comes into emergence. So the false self wears many different masks, and that would include overachiever, fixer, codependent. And again, they're completely oblivious of this, but they're doing it in essence as a mechanism to receive love, to be loved, and to be validated. Stage four is immobilization. At this particular stage, the authentic self is completely immobilized, repressed, and blocked. And the individual is now operating out of maladaptive coping mechanisms. That would be your addiction. That would be your anxiety. That would be your depression. And at this particular stage, the shame identity is completely solidified, it is internalized, it is habituated, it becomes an inherent part of the individual's identity. It is also at this stage where the individual will experience burnout, breakdowns, and suicidal ideation. So this particular stage is very, very debilitating and very devastating. Stage five is restoration. At this particular stage, the individual there's a returning to the authentic self. So the individual becomes more cognizant.
Is that upon healing, I guess?
Yes. The individual at this stage is becoming more cognizant of the presence of shame. They're going to start talking about it, maybe like about their issues in AA or with a therapist. But this stage is very important because it can have a positive end result or a negative end result. So if they don't come to terms with their shame and become aware of it, they can be caught up in a chronic shame, a negative shame feedback loop where they never get out of it. They just keep spinning their wheels round and round and round and round.
And they're probably passing that on.
Exactly. But
they're passing it on.
Yeah. So for individuals that might die sadly of alcoholism or suicide, what might be driving a lot of those behaviors unbeknownst to them is shame. Wow. Exactly. So this is a perfect example of them getting caught up in that restoration stage.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Stage 6 is transformation. At this particular stage, a metamorphosis or a dramatic change is taking place. And what happens at this stage is the individual is not only cognizant of the presence of shame, but they're able to utilize tools and techniques to mitigate the shame, to neutralize it, and to keep it at bay. They're also able not to get caught up in that shame vortex from the past. They're also able to become that wonderful healing, that parent, that wonderful parent, drawing from the 4 healing components. They're also able to become their own therapist in essence. So it's stage 6 is more about healing and coming to terms with and taking charge of it. Okay. Stage 7 is my favorite stage of all, and that's liberation. So at this particular stage, the individual is no longer encumbered by a push-pull mentality shame or the shame circuit. They're able to fully embrace their authentic self once again. They're able to become their best version of themselves. They're able to reconstruct that dysfunctional narrative from the past. They're able to become all that they're meant to be, and they're liberated, and they no longer feel bogged down or anchored by that horrific presence of shame. And that is where I am at, Irene. I am there, finally.
So let me ask you, though, now that you've done so much healing and now that you've transformed, how does that change your relationship with your family of origin who are not changing? And I'm just going to say one thing with me, like I had, when my mother reconnected with me after 23 years of not speaking to me, and I had through therapy and all realized she was a battered woman and all that jazz. I said, because I'd had so much therapy, I said to her, Mom, I have a sliver of a window open for you, but our relationship has to change. I've been in therapy. I've done this. And she said, and my mother, my father had had his first stroke, and my father was losing his power over her, was able to say to me, what do I have to do? And I literally got my mother into therapy, and then all kinds of healing took place. But how do you handle it when your parents say, I don't care about that. I'm not changing. I'm not doing any. I mean, how does a person, you're changing, so now a different person is coming back into the family system. Do you help people to navigate that, or do they detach, or how does that work?
Well, you know what? That's where one of the 4 core healing components come into play, and that's acceptance. So I have to realize that, unfortunately, there are many of my family members that have chosen to stay in a place of resistance and denial and shame. And I have to accept that. Okay. I also have to accept the fact, perhaps, that they don't have that ego strength to work through it. But again, it's about accepting the fact that they want to go through this, they want to live in this constant place of resistance and denial, and that's their prerogative and that's their right. But despite it, I can still love them. I can love them from a distance. However, with individuals within the family dynamic that are so unhealed, unhealthy, and well, I have to create boundaries in essence to protect myself. So the toxic shame or the shame that they have not dealt with, processed, resolved, I can't allow them to keep projecting it upon me. But going back to the other core healing component is
that was my next question.
Yes.
You must be psychic.
Yes. And I don't know who said it, but I think she was a Holocaust survivor, Corrie Tenenbaum. She said, to forgive is to set the prisoner free, and to know that prisoner in essence is you. So, I have to forgive them, with what they're not wanting to look at, what they don't want to resolve. And accept the fact that they want to live with toxic shame or toxic dysfunction. That's their right. That's their prerogative.
So we've talked about, so there are 4 core elements. One is acceptance, and one is
compassion,
forgiveness. And what are the other 2?
Compassion and self-love. And they are paramount. And let me explain why. So when I'm working with clients, I remind them that although shame can happen in the then and the there, it can be reactivated in the here and the now. And what an individual doesn't want to do when their shame has become triggered or reactivated is you don't want to move into those self-deprecating behaviors. Because what it does in essence is it cultivates more shame and it reinforces those pathways in the brain. And that's exactly what you don't want to do. So you always want to draw from acceptance, compassion, forgiveness, and self-love, because in doing so, you're not only healing the shame, but you're unlearning the shame and you're not reinforcing those pathways within the brain.
Which to my world, in my mind, says you're becoming conscious. Because when you had the
Absolutely.
shame, you were unconscious. You had all this perpetrated on you. You didn't know what you were doing. Now you're healing and you're becoming aware. And now you're consciously employing ways to offset what happened, right? Have I got that right, Monica?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So tell me this, though, because we talk about grief on this podcast. How can shame induce grief? And how is that reconciled by doing grief work? So if someone has had a terrible loss.
Okay, so let me speak to that. So first and foremost, shame acts as a barrier and prevents healthy grieving from taking place. So in essence, the individual doesn't feel as though they have the right to even grieve. So let me explain. So say an individual has a family member died from a typical situation, may it be a suicide or an overdose. And let's say they start going to support groups for grief. So then what happens is, well, it's their time to speak. And all of a sudden, because they feel so ashamed or embarrassed, they don't want to talk. So then what happens is they like, okay, I'm not going to go back to that group. I'm not going to speak anymore. And what's happening is they're home and it's cultivating, it's causing more isolation. And so in essence, they're not grieving. And so you can clearly see that shame is so insidious. It prevents you from being able to process that grief that so desperately needs to be processed. So it impedes and it thwarts the whole grieving process altogether.
Wow. So if a person is grieving and it's a maladaptive coping mechanism.
It is.
Right. So if they're grieving, a lot of people go for grief counseling or guidance. I would imagine shame comes up as a part of that sometimes when they're.
Absolutely. And let me just say this to you right here and now, Irene. How many people listen to your podcast, watch your podcast, that have so much shame that they never come on your podcast? And quite frankly, I don't even know if I would be here today myself if I didn't, guess what, process and work through my own grief. So there is such, you look at shame and you look at grief and they can feed off one another. But it's so important to understand the magnitude of shame and again, how it can impede the whole grieving process. Which is tragic.
Tragic. Monica, do you help people who are grieving? In your therapy practice, you get people who are grieving and identifying that that there's an element there that maybe they're experiencing their grief instead of on a scale of 1 to 10, they got their grief is going to a 20. Maybe there's something else fueling it. Do you get people like that?
Absolutely. And many, many times, especially when you're working with LGBTQ clients, or again, individuals that had a family member that has had a death and they're experiencing that grief again, they don't even understand it. They don't even understand at times what the grief is that they're feeling. So in essence, a lot of them experience what's referred to as a disenfranchised grief. It's atypical from, oh yeah, my grandpa passed away, or no, this is about, no, my family member, my loved one committed suicide. And in that disenfranchised grief, there is horrific shame.
Wow.
It's horrific.
Wow. So
Yeah.
in a way, if they address that, they're really dropping that rock.
Exactly.
They're grieving. They've had a loss. They don't even realize there's that extra rock that they're carrying with it.
Absolutely.
So your therapist inspires you to write your book, Conquering Shame, Surviving to Thriving, which is wonderful. So
Mhm.
can you tell us about how you were inspired for that? And you speak also to the concept of becoming your own therapist while you're dealing with shame. So talk to us about your book and about those concepts, Monica.
Absolutely. So this is hilarious. So again, I'm working with my therapist and I'm a writer. I love to write. So one day I was so enthusiastic and I said, oh, I've got some great news to share with you. And I said, I'm writing a book on trauma. And his face drops. And he's like, no, 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 no. You want to write on shame. And I'm like, shame? I said, I absolutely know nothing about shame. I can't write this book on shame. And lo and behold, not only do I write this book on shame, but I also, develop the developmental and recovery stages of shame. And I can't begin to tell you, writing this book, what it has done for me, how cathartic I am, healed from my shame. And granted, it can come up here and there, but it's because of this book. And not only that, this book is helping thousands and thousands of people. I had one review that said, this book needs to be put at every rehabilitation center in America because it is so instrumental in recovery for helping individuals. Yeah.
That's wonderful. And I can totally relate to that and make
Mhm.
having that being a part of your healing.
Mhm.
And it's wonderful because you also talk about the cornerstones of recovery, and there's so many insights in your book about shame. That's great. Can you also talk to us about the importance of, because you speak to this in your book, the importance of letting go of the past and the healing power of forgiveness? Because a lot of times people think forgiveness is letting the person off the hook, but it's not. And letting go of the past means you're also that it never happened and you're forgiving them. So can you explain those concepts to everyone, which are part of releasing that rock?
Yeah, so I have what I refer to as Monica-isms. And one of my favorite Monica-isms is look not in the past, for the past will never come back. And again, when I reflect on my life and everything that happened, I can recognize that there were very, very sick, dysfunctional parents that were ill-equipped to dealing with life and their own issues. But again, just letting that go and being freed up of that, I'm not bogged down, I'm not anchored in all of that dysfunctionalism and all of that toxic shame. And it's just like I said, it's so liberating. And I don't want to be in that place anymore. But again, forgiveness is absolutely paramount and it's key. So I hope I answered your question.
I do. I think it's kind of like looking at the origins of your shame or origins of what happened to you and saying, yes, that existed. But by holding on to all of that, now that I'm healing, I am not letting myself be free. Forgiving is, and all of that is letting go of it. Doesn't
Absolutely.
mean it didn't exist. Doesn't mean you don't protect yourself.
Exactly.
Right?
Absolutely.
But it
Yeah,
doesn't live in you to trip you up all over the place in your
exactly.
life, right? So
Exactly.
tell us, now that everyone knows how special this is and what you're doing to help people who have had these problems in their lives, and there's so many of us, tell us about your one-on-one mentoring sessions, your lectures, your workshops, and anything else you'd like to share with our Grief and Rebirth audience.
Sure. So I provide one-on-one mentoring sessions, and I draw from a psychoeducational paradigm to help enhance overall functionality and overall quality of life for clients. So when I'm working with clients, I teach them about agency, boundaries, codependency, dysregulation, emotional regulation. I teach them about triggers, trauma responses, fear responses, stress responses, self-limiting beliefs, how to navigate through the developmental and recovery stages of shame, normalizing anxiety and depression, rethinking anxiety and depression. So there's a plethora of things that I teach them. In addition to that, I also provide psychoeducational workshops focusing on topics pertinent to mental health. And I've also taken my books, Rethinking Anxiety and Depression, Two Important Messengers, and Conquering Shame, Surviving to Thriving. And I've turned those into workshops as well.
That's wonderful. That's so helpful for people.
Yeah.
And do you have a special offer for our audience today?
Yes, today I am going to be offering 10% off of my newest book, Conquering Shame, Surviving to Thriving. And also, if you go to my website,
and we'll provide everybody, we will be providing you all those links.
Yes, there's a link that you can go to where I'm actually presenting a lecture on shame, and that's free, and that's very, very informative. And it's been very helpful for many, many viewers that have watched that particular video that I've made.
I'm sure that people listen to what you say and it's like lights going off. Oh my God.
Yeah.
That happened to me. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's what that was all about, right?
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Let's talk to the importance of healing shame and how, if unhealed, it metastasizes. You call it an emotional cancer that eats away at the person's quality of life. Can you speak to that, Monica?
Yes.
Why should all these people listening come to face the fact that, unfortunately, wounded people gave them wounding messages?
Yes, yes. So it's so important to heal shame, because if you give a shame an inch, it'll take a mile. And then what happens is it becomes implanted, it becomes internalized, it becomes an inherent part of the individual's identity, and it literally can self-sabotage and destroy your entire life, and you're not even aware of it. And that is exactly what happened to me. Hence, it kept metastasizing. Irene, I don't know how many times that I had opportunities and I sabotaged because it's like, you know what? Who's going to want to listen to me? And I didn't realize that shame, in essence, was always at the base of what I was doing and driving my behavior. And this speaks to so many people that are grappling with addiction, or individuals that have some sort of addiction, or they have some sort of a problem that they can't seem to conquer. They're not cognizant of it. So it is so important to understand how shame can take shape, how it can take hold and take charge of it and control of it. And that is what my book offers. In my book, I provide a questionnaire. And another thing is, most people think, oh, I just have shame. No. There's various levels of shame. So there's low, there's moderate, there's severe, and there's toxic. And I just so happen to win the trifecta and come down with toxic shame. So.
And we're looking at someone who has let go
Absolutely.
of all of that. And look at how free you are now, right? And here you are. Absolutely.
Liberation is wonderful.
Liberation. Yeah, right.
Amen.
And you're talking to someone, I'm experiencing the same thing. So we're sisters in that. And could you please explain to everyone how joy can come from healing yourself and healing others, which here we are.
Well, first and foremost, finding the things in life that clearly bring you joy, and taking those things and incorporating them and making them into somewhat of a practice, and teaching other people how to do that as well, like my clients and other people that I come into contact with. But I think ultimately shame comes from what we're doing here today, healing, and just normalizing our experiences. And, but joy comes, I think, ultimately from helping others. And that's what I love to do.
Right. Well, you've taken your pain, you've dropped it, but now you're using it as a guidepost for others. And that's such a beautiful, liberating, freeing. And I'm doing the same thing actually through this podcast in a lot of ways. So we're both, it's just a beautiful thing. And we wish it for everyone listening who is struggling with their own issues now that we're helping you to identify them.
Absolutely.
Right, Monica?
Absolutely.
I mean, it's so, I want to use the word rewarding, but it's rewarding to help people, to see other people also get free from their shackles of what's been pulling them down, right?
Absolutely.
Right? I want to share this important quote because your book is so compelling, and it's just a compelling quote from Conquering Shame, Surviving to Thriving. And I want to share this with our audience because I loved how Monica put this. This is part of the hero's journey, to heal yourself and experience a peace you've never known, to return home to your authentic self and to be set free. When I reflect on my journey, I realize I was never all of those diagnoses assigned to me, but rather a child who was highly abused and traumatized. All of the symptoms I brought forth in therapy were part of my collective pain, and I was merely looking for a name for it. At the core of all of my symptoms and problems was toxic shame. When you reflect on your own journey, can you say the same? Monica, I am personally so very happy for you that you were able to heal from your traumatic, debilitating shame. Thank you for your important work educating and enlightening people of the importance of identifying toxic shame and healing from it. And I thank you from my heart for this insightful, enlightening interview that is surely opening many eyes and will help people to heal.
And thank you so very much for having me on your podcast. I just want to say this to you. You are an extraordinary human being.
Oh my gosh.
You are so honest and unpretentious. You are so easy to talk to. And talking about shame is a very difficult thing to do. You, again, become a wonderful vessel in healing so many people's lives. And thank you. I just want to let you know that this particular interview has been so redeeming to me, because the last time I did an interview, I again utilized the wrong word and it tripped me up. And so in essence, this wonderful interview has been so liberating for me. And it's because of you and the work that you do that you continue to heal so many millions of people out there. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for you being you and the extraordinary work that you do, Irene. Thank you so much.
Oh, blessings. Thank you so much, Monica. As I like to say, to be continued. And I really want to thank you from my heart. Many blessings to everyone. And we will say adieu for now, but everyone make sure that you check out all the show notes. You make sure you check out all the links, and there'll be more to come. Thanks so much, Monica.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Grief and Rebirth. Remember, you can dive deeper into everything we've discussed by checking out the show notes and all past episodes at ireneweinberg.com. Don't forget to follow us on social media at Irene S. Weinberg on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and wherever you love to hang out online. Plus, we're on YouTube, so be sure to subscribe and never miss a video. For those of you listening, you'll find links to my 2 books, Good to the Last Drop and They Serve Bagels in Heaven, in the show notes. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can see those books listed right above, so don't miss out. And here comes a special treat. If you sign up for Audible as a first-time user using my link, which you can find in the show notes, you can get They Serve Bagels in Heaven for free. And finally, people often ask me what I read, what I use, and what I recommend for healing and self-care. So I've carefully curated a compilation of those items to share with you. You can head over to kit.com/Irene
grief and rebirth to check them out. Thanks again for tuning in. And until next time, many blessings.